Folks, we are beginning, it's still Wednesday, February 12th, and we are going to learn about a tax abatement and tax sale report that was the product of a working group that we requested this summer as a follow-up to legislation we passed last year related to tax sales. Lots of context there. And I think so what we have today is Kirby is going to take us through some of the background. And then we have a number of members of the working group here to share their perspectives on it with us. Kirby. Also, just so folks know, we had a joint hearing scheduled this afternoon with the Agency of Education to hear their budget proposal. Not like big education transformation stuff, just their annual budget proposal, so we could prepare to communicate to appropriations about our thoughts on that. They have canceled that hearing, and it's too short notice to really reschedule something else. So we are all going to do independent work this afternoon.
Good morning, everyone. Kirby Keaton, Legislative Counsel. We are going to take a quick trip through municipal law from Act 106 of last session. As the chair mentioned, there's other folks here ready to give a report related to this. So Act 106 made some changes to how municipal tax abatement is done and how municipal tax sales are done when someone's behind on their taxes or fees that they owe the town. The first part of 106 was about tax abatement, so we'll go through that first. I'll just take you through. So in section 1, there were some small changes relatively to tax abatement. On the screen here. Oh, actually, let me give you some background in case folks aren't familiar with tax abatement. Every municipality has a board of abatement. That board of abatement can basically forgive municipal taxes and fees that are owed, but they have to follow statute. I think you're probably all aware that Vermont is a Dillon rule state, which means that municipalities only have the power that the state grants them through statute. So that's why we have a lot of law on what municipalities can and can't do. So the boards of abatement can forgive municipal taxes and fees for certain situations, but they have to follow the statutes that we're going to walk through right now. So given that, last year, the General Assembly added some things that could be abated and made some changes to the process for abatement. So one of those things is that apart from taxes, water charges, sewer charges, interest, or collection fees, we added other municipal charges or fees for utility services as something that can be abated. That just gives the Board of Abatement more things that it could possibly forgive. Going further down, we have the list of reasons that abatement could be granted under the law. So if they can't, the board can't abate any taxes for any reason, it has to be one of these reasons in statute. There's some clarifying language added to the provision on a error or mistake of the listers. The word manifest was changed to clear or obvious as a clarification. And then going on to page 2, there was a new reason added for why abatement could be granted. And that's for sewer, water, utility, or service charges caused by circumstances that were difficult to foresee or outside a person's control. What the folks in committee had in mind when that was added, this was added in the Senate, was like when a water main bursts and a person accrues a bunch of water charges, that could be abated by the Board of Abatement. Act 106 also added some clarification around when the board either denies or grants abatement when a person goes in to ask for it, how that written decision should be made. So we have language here that's adding more specificity to the process for abatement before the board and for the hearing. and what they're supposed to write down. Act 106 also gave boards the ability to grant abatement for a class. There's a lot of rules that go along with it, but the gist of it is that for certain circumstances, like property that's lost or damaged, when there's a lister mistake, or when a mobile home's been moved, those are the specific instances. The Board of Abatement could take a whole group of people who are in a similar situation and grant or deny abatement at the same time for that class. And there's rules around that. This is natural disasters were basically what was in mind with this, like a flood, and there's a lot of flooded properties. So all those flooded properties and those property owners could be taken together and have one hearing that's more efficient. There are a lot of rules around that. People could opt out of being part of the class if they want to, and there's rules around opting out. Under this new option, if there is abatement granted that's not full, then every person in that class or every property in that class has to be a proportional abatement. So you could say, forgive 50% of the property taxes for the entire class. That would be proportional. What would not be proportional is if you set $1,000 off, because that's not going to be the same for everyone. So that's one of the rules there. A bit more background, so you know, if the Board of Abatement grants abatement, that's forgiving municipal taxes and fees. But when it comes to property taxes, they can't, the town's not off the hook for education taxes. So when education taxes are abated, that means the town still has to pay for that, just so you are aware of that. There is a provision added that when the municipality attempts to collect fees, interest, or charges, delinquent taxes, that they have to inform the taxpayer of the option to request abatement. And we'll be getting into delinquent taxes a lot more later on in the bill. And then there's also a provision added that the legislative body may abate. So this would be not the Board of Abatement, this would be the legislative body of the municipality would be able to abate de minimis amounts. This was added to basically to allow some freedom for accounting purposes, to just balance the books, like when it comes to a few cents or small amounts like that. Okay, so the other change for abatement was a change to the form that's in statute for sewer and water disconnect. There's a number of things that are on that form already, such as, the basic information for what's owed, why it's being disconnected, the charges, the interest, the ability for a person to possibly postpone having it disconnected, appeals. And so what was added to that here and what you see is also some information about the ability to seek abatement when there's a sewer or water disconnect. And then we have for Section 3 of Act 106, there were some changes around the bill backer that the Department of Taxes creates to provide information on the back of property tax bills. What was added here?
A lot of this was about sort of when we talked to individual municipalities about this, it sounded like a lot of the folks who had overdue property taxes did not know about the property tax credit programs.
Right. And so this was part of an effort to address that. So on that bill backer, there was supposed to be information added regarding how to pursue a property tax credit. There was information added about having a resource where some translation into non-English languages would be available. A lot of the notices we touch on later will have the same resource. The way it works is the department would, maybe we'll hear about how it works in the real world. It was kind of abstract before. the idea, I think, was that there'll be a link to a website where you could go and see the same information in a different language. Like that was my understanding of how that was going to be done. So when we see that later on, just know that the department's supposed to have a link or some kind of resource for translation there. So that's on the bill backer with the PTC. Another change that was done to that bill backer was currently that information is provided. Well, before the law had the information provided to people who filed a homestead declaration. So the idea was that you can only get a PTC if it's your homestead. So we're only going to give information to people who filed a homestead declaration. The gap or problem there was, well, some people were eligible to file a homestead declaration, but they didn't. And that was part of the lack of information out there for people to know what's available to them. So this change makes it so that all residential properties will receive this information in the hopes that it would alert some people who hadn't filed a homestead that they could.
Didn't we used to do that? I know we did. Early on, everybody used to get a homestead declaration, and then somehow that changed.
Like it was mailed to them?
Either that or it was in the tax return.
Just from my experience in filing taxes, most of the tax software that exists out there will prompt and ask people about that. I think some people don't have to file income taxes because they don't earn enough. Some people, may not be prompted or may not have that, or they may misunderstand when they're doing their taxes with tax prep software. So for whatever it is, we do know that some people report anecdotally that I didn't know that I could get this property tax credit. I didn't know I could.
I believe that, and it's always been tough trying to get the word out to the taxpayer about what's out there, especially everything that has to do with property tax.
Mhm.
So good, but kind of.
So that was some things added related to that issue, and that brings us into the heaviest part of the bill probably, which is about tax sales. Real briefly, the way tax sales work is that if a person is behind on what they owe to the municipality, the municipality can initiate a tax sale to try to get what's owed to it. The tension is that the municipalities have their budgets and they also owe education tax to the state. And so when a person falls behind, it means the municipality is making up for it in the short term. So the tool that Vermont allows them is to use a tax sale to try to get what's owed for themselves.
And when we began this bill last session, some of the impetus for it was like property taxes were about to go up. And so we were trying to prepare for that in all ways. But one of the other pieces, and maybe someone from the task force will speak to this, there's a incredible amount of inconsistency in at what level towns will go to tax sale and how many tax sales towns are going towards. And it was really sort of just an effort to get consistency across the board. Some towns are really following most of these without the statute, and some were not coming even close to this kind of equity.
Right. So in response, this act, one change it made, you see there, is it put a 1-year waiting period on initiating a tax sale. So a taxpayer would have to be delinquent and owe for at least 1 year before it could be initiated. And another requirement that's added here is that the municipality has to offer a reasonable repayment plan before it can initiate the tax sale as well. And there's sections of law below that we'll get to that go through what that means, the reasonable repayment plan. So those were the two big requirements to try to add some standardization to the process across the state. There were some changes done to the notice that is sent to a delinquent taxpayer once the tax sale is actually initiated by the municipality. Previously, the law required 10 days notice when a person was a resident of the town, or a 20-day notice if they were non-resident before the tax sale was to take place. This changed it to 30 days to give that taxpayer more time to prepare or possibly to get together the resources to prevent the tax sale. When it comes to that notice, the requirements before were that it has to be sent by first-class mail or personal service. A lot of discussion last year about personal service, which is expensive and difficult, and so first-class mail tends to be the way to go there. But there were some other ways to notify a person added. So in addition to the first-class mail, this law made it so that if an email is available or easily can be acquired, then they have to use email as well to notify the delinquent taxpayer. And there also has to be a notice affixed to the front door if the property has a structure. We talked about the 30-day notice. This goes for the notice that is sent to the mortgagee or lien holder, if there is one. So that was also extended to let those folks know. And there was an additional requirement added here, requiring that the translation resource to be included when notice is sent to the taxpayer or the lien holder / mortgagee. And also some additional language to be included in the notices. Which is explaining briefly the process that they can expect for the tax sale. Next, there was some language added that was clarifying because the issue or a question was raised during the discussion of what happens when a person's delinquent for more than a year, and then in the meantime, they're also accumulating other debts. And do they have to, would a municipality have to wait for those other debts since they are not a year old yet? And so this clarifying language states that if there's any debt that's more than a year old, then the tax sale could be initiated for all the debts that are owed. And then in C1 here, we have the reasonable repayment plan. So this has to be offered before a tax sale can be initiated. So the taxpayer could deny the offer, and then the municipality could proceed with the tax sale. The taxpayer could fail to respond within 30 days. Or the taxpayer could have agreed to a repayment plan, but then failed to make a payment. And in all of those cases, the tax sale could proceed if those things happen. There's some guidance here about what a municipality could take into account when deciding what it will offer for a reasonable repayment plan. Such as taking into account the income resources of the taxpayer, their payment history, the total amount of debt, et cetera. So there's no hard requirements, but there's some kind of soft guidelines here for what to consider for these. There's some more clarifying language about the municipality only being required to offer one payment plan. They wouldn't have to keep offering these. And then some extra clarifying language that the payment plan can be voided if the person fails to make a timely payment. Okay, so those are the changes to the initiating the tax sale section of law. The next is the advertisement that goes out when a tax sale is initiated and it's being advertised to the public, and there's notices sent to both the public and to the property owner. So this public notice that's in law here, there was some language added for that, letting the public know about the property owner's right to redemption, which is something that we'll be getting into because there were changes made to that as well. But so you know, if you own a property and there's a tax sale on that property, after the sale, you have 1 year to pay the municipality back what you owed. Specifically, you have to pay the person who purchased it at tax sale to make them whole. But just so you understand how this works, if let's say you owe 10,000 in taxes and fees, and the property was purchased for 20,000, the 10,000 that you owed that the buyer from the buyer would go to the town to pay off debt. There's an extra 10,000, right? That would go to the property owner. The surplus would go to the property owner in Vermont. So if this happened to you in this case, you'd be given 10,000. You would have to pay the purchaser 20,000 to exercise your right to redemption. So basically, you need to come up with your 10,000 more, what you had owed the municipality. As time goes by, though, under the law, every month that passes, there's a 1% interest that would go to the purchaser of the property for their right to redemption. So let's say a person tries to redeem after 6 months, they'll have to pay back what was paid for the property at the tax sale plus 6%, 1% for each of those months that's passed. And in the example I used, though, the taxpayer would have the 10,000 surplus to start with. Does that all make sense? Okay.
Yeah, Representative.
Ish, but if Bridget owes $10,000 on the property, can't pay it, I pay $20,000 to the town, right?
No, I mean, that was just in my example. I mean, it might be that you paid just what is owed because.
$10,000, right?
Yeah, and in that case, I just made it a little bit more complicated just so you'd understand the different parts of how it work. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. But I said more, but it's so that you'd understand that the surplus does go back to
It's
the,
going to an auction, right?
yes, it's an auction.
Okay, but I guess I need clarification then. If Bridget owns $10,000 and Charlie goes to the tax sale and he just pays the $10,000 to the town, that makes the town whole.
Mhm.
She loses the property, right?
Yes.
And he owns it.
But there's that 1 year redemption period where, so saying that he owns it isn't entirely true because
Right.
she could still have that year to redeem.
She could come up with $10,000 in the meantime and pay him, right? Because the
Yes.
town's already been paid off,
And plus the monthly interest.
plus the monthly interest. Okay.
And that's what might be in it for him, that monthly interest, because he knows that he may not get to keep the property, but at least it's an investment because you might get a little extra back.
In the example of the 20,000, the town has that.
Example of the 20,000, the town is made whole, and then the surplus goes back to the person whose property owned it.
Bridget gets the $10,000.
Yes. But to redeem, she'd still need to pay that 20,000 that you paid. Okay.
All that is new. Is that all law right now? It's not law.
So we're going to go into the changes. What I just described is the basic process that's been law. Okay, so here's the redemption section of law. These things you're seeing now, this was just clarifying language that was added. So the new parts. During that redemption period that we were talking about, this law made it so that between 90 days and 120 days prior to the end of the redemption period, the municipality needs to let the delinquent taxpayer, it needs to warn them that, hey, your redemption period's running out. If you're going to do something to redeem, you should act now. That's the point of this notice that you see here. That same notice will be posted in a public place at that same time, 90 to 120 days before the redemption period's over. In the notice about redemptions that are sent out, again, we have the translation service and we have basic information about how to go about the process. So that was all new.
And there's no current law.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. If I wasn't clear about this, this is Act 106 from last session. This is all law. All these changes were made. That brings us to the working group, which you're here to hear from. This group consisted of one representative from Vermont Legal Aid, one representative from Vermont League of Cities and Towns, one from Vermont Bankers Association, one from Vermont Housing Finance Agency, one from the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association, one from the Neighbor Works Alliance of Vermont, and one from Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity Mobile Home Project, and one from the Listers and Assessors Association, and one from the Bar Association. So there were 9 members. And they were to answer a number of questions. Many of them related to things that were considered in the General Assembly last year, but no action was taken on. So first question is, what does this group think about the concept of equity in the home? So in our examples we were talking about before.
Not equity like equal, but equity.
Yeah, I'll describe what I mean.
Okay.
In money terms, equity, value. There's a tax sale for 20,000, but say the home is worth, it's listed on the grand list as worth 20,000. Or I mean, 200,000. Currently, the law in Vermont, and as far as I know, other states also. I'm not aware of a state that fully takes equity into account here, but there is the concept of, well, there's, in our example, $180,000 worth of value that gets lost. And should the law try to account for that at all? Should the delinquent taxpayer receive more out of this? If a tax sale occurs, they never redeem, they've lost the property. So that's one thing that we're supposed to hear about, this equity concept. The arguments from last year against that were, if you take full equity into account, who is going to buy a house at a tax sale then? So that's the tension there. The second question was whether we need more things added to law to standardize abatements. In the first couple of sections of the act that we talked about before, there were some things added to try to standardize the process and the hearings for abatement. Do we need more? The third question is an idea that was considered last year, which was whether the state should require a minimum amount of tax debt before a tax sale is initiated. This act put the 1 year and the reasonable repayment plan requirements in there, but there's still no minimum amount that could be owed. But that was something that was discussed. The fourth question was, should there be any exceptions to that 1 year rule about waiting for the tax sale? Should there be an exception for if there's blighted, dilapidated real estate or abandoned real estate? In that case, could the tax sale be initiated sooner so that the municipality can do something about that? The next question relates to the 1% interest per month that we talked about with the right to redemption. There was discussion last year about whether that's too high, whether it makes it much more difficult for people to redeem and much more likely for them to lose their property. And on the flip side of that, does it incentivize people to actually purchase properties at tax sale though, so that the municipality can be made whole? So if you were to eliminate that, that can make it more difficult for municipalities, was the argument. The sixth question was whether the purchaser at tax sale could protect the property against illegal activity, damage, deterioration, things like that. whether that should be expressly granted as a right in the law so that you can protect your investment, so to speak. And then the last question was, what could the state possibly do to get some more information on tax sales? During the discussion last year, in the various committees, it was apparent that there's not a lot of data out there on statewide on how many tax sales occur or even basic things. Like a lot of it's unknown. I think the League of Cities and Towns was the best resource as far as having some knowledge on that, but there's an interest in gathering more of it. And I think that's it for all of the most relevant parts of the act.
Kirby, going back to the piece that you had said that if a town abates the education property tax, the town's on the hook for that.
Mhm.
Wasn't there money in the budget last year to help Barry and Bill Johnson?
Yeah, so there was, and that wasn't the first time that's been done for flooded properties specifically in those disaster areas. There was some appropriation to reimburse those municipalities that had abated because of flooding and were then had to still pay for that education tax. So it's basically paying them back.
Do we know if all that money was used or what the status is of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it is known,
Yeah.
but not by me.
Representative Higley, which money?
I'm sorry?
Which money?
The money that was paid to Barry and Lindenville or whatever for the abated amount.
Okay, I think that question's gonna come back to us in budget adjustment maybe, and so we will be able to dig into that.
Okay, thanks.
Not in budget adjustment,
not budget.
in the budget.
I think it's possibly gonna come back to us in the budget adjustment from the Senate, but it might be in the budget. I don't know.
It's in the original governor's
Yes,
budget.
yes.
Part of the pilot money.
That's different, that's a different thing. Thank you.
Okay.
That's for future that's for sort of grand list loss. It's not for individual properties that are appraised wrong in a grand list. They're two slight, in one sort of like a first. Kirby, will you explain the difference?
I think different items.
Yes, they're two different items.
Are you talking about what's in the miscellaneous tax bill? There's something on like extending the flood
Yes,
reimbursement.
the new fiscal year. Yes.
Yeah.
Will you explain that?
I think it's to extend it for, I think it stopped at November, December, something like that last year. Like the window for that reimbursement, and this proposal would extend it beyond that. So just another year but it would be potentially different municipalities that were affected this past year.
But then we'll dive into that when we get that bill. Which might move out of the miscellaneous tax bill into budget adjustment. On the Senate side, but we'll find out when it gets here.
Okay, I just thought it was in the regular budget proposal from the governor
And that's a different thing. That's the pilot money.
to take money from the local option tax
Yes.
to repay municipalities for the abated education tax.
Yes. Which is slightly different. And we will get both of those separate things, add language, and we'll talk about them then. Okay, figure them out right now. Yes. Any other questions for Kirby about this law? Great. Okay. So thank you very much, Kirby. We have an hour and 5 minutes, and we have a delightful list of witnesses who are all on a work group together. And so are in some ways coordinating their testimony, and in some ways might be giving differing testimony. I want to make sure that we have time for the last person on the list. So just sort of want to make everyone mindful of that. Sometimes when you have lots of people in one testimony block, or Josh Hanford gets short shrift. So. Yes, Jim.
Nice to see you all.
So nice.
I need to find my furnace had been out for several days and in fact needs to be replaced.
Oh, no.
I spent the last couple of days dealing with contractors. Have to be home again tomorrow for installation. That's quick. I got two different prices. They're $4,000 apart.
We know which one you picked.
Well, we are all glad that your pipes did not freeze.
But anyway, yeah, so I'm alive and well, and I'll be here today and not much tomorrow. But
Wonderful. Thank you. Chris, I think you have to be in another committee soon, so if you want to join us.
thank you.
Good morning. Good to see you again. For the record, Chris Delia, President, Vermont Bankers Association. To save time, I'll try and just give you a high-level overview of the study committee, which was spirited to say the least and enjoyable to have those conversations. Just very quickly, and this is something that I'm going to flag for your government operations committees, is we ran into a significant obstacle with the open meeting laws because no state entity or legislator was assigned to us. We didn't realize early on that we were subject to the open meeting laws of the state of Vermont. And we actually spent quite a bit of time having to be educated by the Secretary of State's office and the Ledge Council as to what that meant. So unfortunately, we lost a little bit of time, and I think there's an easy solution. The legislature moves forward with other working groups in the future. The working committee.
Can I maybe get you all in front of the GovOps committee at some point and flag it for them so they can tackle
Yeah,
it?
absolutely.
Great.
Happy to. So I think the report's fairly self-explanatory, but we broke up into working groups. Questions 1, 3, and 5 were one group. Question 2, question 4 and 6 were another group, and then question 7. And I think it's fair to say that we probably have one very strong recommendation for you. And then there were areas that there was less agreement on. And then I think there's areas where we made some recommendations, but in ways it acknowledges the challenge that you all started with last year. We have inconsistency across the state of Vermont when it comes to these types of processes, and municipalities have their own way of doing things, and it may be different in one town compared to another. So that's part of the challenge that you all had to look at. The first one, I'll just go quickly, recoup equity. I think it's fair to say there are two competing thoughts on this. There's a group that feels that strongly that equity needs to go back to the property owner. I think it's important to define what that is and when it is determined what that is, because is it determined at the time the sale occurs? Is it determined at the time of the end of the redemption period? There's a few dates in here that I think come into play. And then there's others who felt that it's still an open-ended conversation. And I think when, for example, Grace comes to the table, there's court cases that address these types of discussions, and she is much more knowledgeable about that than I am. But the question of equity following the tax sale is still an open-ended conversation for you all to take a look at if you choose to. Standardization of the abatement process. On page 5 of the report, there's 2 bullets up above that just give you some general recommendations about trying to standardize the process across the state of Vermont, and some thoughts there. The one area that I think we have unanimous agreement on, and this is still on page 5 under issue 3, the notion of what's the right amount before you go to a tax sale. For those who weren't with us last year, we had conversations about, well, going to tax sale for $300 versus going to tax sale for a larger amount. And the working group settled on $1,500 because we think one addresses the fact that should we really be going to tax sale for $300? But it also addresses the flip side. If you make the amount so big that somebody can't get out from under it, that's problematic as well. So $1,500 seemed to be reasonable. And again, keep in mind, you've got that time frame of a year in place from the time it's delinquent till the time that the tax sale can be initiated. And then there was a recommendation of notifying municipal officers that taxpayers applied for any public assistance. That gets back to the notion of the credit that's available out there. And I think an underlying agreement with the working group is that credit system, if it's not known to individuals, should be, and moving them toward taking advantage of that. It's not easy, but that piece under the underlying statute that you passed last year is an important one. I go to issue 4, the tax sales of blighted or dilapidated properties. This is a real difficult one that your government operations committees look at probably on an annual basis because some town comes in with a charter change with this language in it. There is no, to my knowledge, clear definition of what we mean by blighted or dilapidated. It changes from town to town. And while it is a very difficult issue for communities to deal with, to try and wrap it up into this discussion was one that we felt might be too difficult and certainly needed further discussion. A lot of your communities, again, in thinking about their charter changes, have either looked at or are looking at new tools that they can use at the municipal level to go after the property owner. And those are discussions that, again, happen in your government operations committees. The interest rate for delinquency taxes, no consensus there. You've got 2 competing views. The one is a lower rate tied to some index. The other is to continue with what you've got in statute. One notion is reduce that amount of obligation that a property owner may have under delinquency. The other notion is that interest rate that's currently in statute is somewhat of an incentive for somebody to show up and act as a bidder. Keep in mind, and I believe I'm correct in remembering our conversations, if nobody shows up, the town becomes the default bidder. Then the town is short on property taxes that they've got to remit to the state or cover their cost within that town. And then that gets back to any equity that's in the property. That town is going to be responsible for that equity. And you've got a redistribution of those expenses to other property owners within the community. So these are not insignificant conversations that you would have if you choose to. The purchaser on items 6, the purchase.
Second.
Yes,
Yeah, just, Chris, nice to see you.
good to see you.
So the scenario you just described,
Yes,
the town ends up as a default owner.
yes.
What's maybe there is no typical, what's the typical ratio of deferred maintenance or whatever to equity in the actual home? Is it very much a disparity or is the town really at a loss? Is it?
I honestly, Jim, don't have any information or answer for you on that.
Continue with a question that you can't answer, just.
Sure, get me thinking about it.
Get you thinking about it. So I appreciate that there's a pothole there.
Yeah.
Like the town could end up with a default ownership of a property that is trouble.
Yep.
Eventually, doesn't the town end up with something that's marketable that I mean, eventually, meaning there's a window there of trauma back and forth.
Well, at the end of the redemption period, if the property owner hasn't redeemed the property, then the property is now in the hands of the municipality.
Yeah.
Same would be true if you had a private investor show up. At the end of the redemption period, the property is in the hands of the investor if the property owner has not redeemed it.
So I follow the logic as you described it. It all makes perfect sense. I'm wondering though, how badly the town is out at the end of the day. Maybe you can't answer, but
Depends.
the curiosity, I'm trying to figure out how we balance these pieces. That's
Sure. I mean, I think that varies on a case by case basis because you're dealing with what's the total amount of the delinquency.
Yep.
And then if you get to the end of the redemption period and it's not redeemed, what's the equity that has to go back to that property owner, depending on what you all decide. And it could be a few $100,000, depending on what the value of the property is.
okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And one aspect of this that stuck with me from our testimony when we passed this last year was, and I don't remember who said it, but basically just that like towns are not in the business of being realtors nor, homestead owners.
Right.
I don't know if that's helpful context, Jim. Back to Chris.
Yes, item 6, sales tax purchaser to be allowed to secure property during redemption. So this came up in the Senate hearing. Former senator from Rutland raised this issue because of some properties down in the Rutland community. This is problematic because you, as the bidder or the town, do not have rights to that property until the end of the redemption period and you obtain the deed. Meanwhile, you have people that are more than likely residing in the property. And if there's, for example, illegal activity going on in the property, the group felt that there are other remedies in statute already that law enforcement could look to, municipalities could look to deal with those illegal activities. But to give a bidder or the municipality the ability to walk into that property, make changes to that property, make repairs to that property, you may not have it at the end of the redemption period. So it's one that we really did not recommend be looked at by the legislature because of the concerns there. And then the data collection, I would concur as we had the discussions last year, although I know Alan Bjerke is here and he's been doing some data gathering. There really is no information, clear information out there that we could go to that really provides you with a complete picture. So with that said, I mean, ultimately, it's up to you folks how big an appetite you have, given the other circumstances and issues that you're facing this year. The one thing we can at least bring to you is the $1,500 piece, and the parties will share with you their thoughts on how they have differing views on some of the other areas.
Thank you. And I appreciate that closing statement because we do not have a lot of appetite, or time at least. We might have a lot of appetite, but not a lot of time to fulfill that appetite this year. And so might need to stay narrow with sort of the one point of agreement.
Yes. And I think it would be good to hear from the practitioners how the changes you made last year are actually playing out. The 1-year time frame, the payment plan, the pushing people toward the tax credit. Those were fairly significant. And we all thought were going to be helpful and probably are in many cases.
And folks, we have the Clerks Association on the testimony list, but they're not able to join us anymore. So I'll have to figure that out in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The document. But they did post a document on the website. Please read it. Grace, thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
Kasdan from Vermont Legal Aid. For those of you who did not see me in committee last year, I'm currently the director of our Consumer and Homeowner Rights Project, formerly the Homeowner Legal Assistance Project. And the reason that we spent so much time advocating for the protections in Act 106 last year and continue to be interested in and concerned about tax sale process and abatement is because every year we are hearing from and working with hundreds of low to moderate income homeowners who are facing either a mortgage foreclosure or property tax sale, property tax delinquency. One of the things I did want to mention, because it continues to be a perennial problem for our clients, and I've been doing some aspect of this work with homeowners for 16 years now at Vermont Legal Aid. Low income, particularly fixed income homeowners on Social Security, disability, or retirement benefits have a very difficult time accessing our property or homestead property tax credit system. So because these are folks, I know you heard earlier about VITA volunteers and the volunteer tax prep folks. If you are a person whose income is below the filing threshold, you don't even know to reach out. You don't know you need to file anything with the tax department. So these folks are often not getting their homestead and property tax credit forms in. And sometimes that means that their the property tax liability is thousands of dollars as opposed to what might be just a couple of $100s based on their very low annual income. And that leads to the problem of carrying a large property tax delinquency. And if they happen to be in a town that uses property tax sale process as a collection method, they can end up in tax sale process, sometimes for amounts as low as a few $100s. And we did, I absolutely concur with Chris that we do not have a good comprehensive statewide data collection system. Vermont Legal Aid, having had a bunch of COVID funding at the time, in 2021, did a public records request to all of the towns in Vermont. We got responses from about 65% of towns, and we found that there were tax sales happening in the state for amounts as low as $180, $329, $357, $359, $435, et cetera. So quite a few under $1,000 of tax debt. And for our mobile homeowners in particular, right, if you're someone making $900 on SSI, you get hit with a $300,000 tax delinquency, property goes to tax sale. Now you're also on the hook for the cost of sale, cost of publication, attorney's fees associated with that sale. And then you've got 12% on top of that that you have to pay within the year to redeem. Otherwise, you lose your property at the end of the process, right? And you're losing your home, which we know in this affordable housing crisis likely means you don't have anywhere to go. And on top of that, this is your one major asset, right? And you're losing all of the equity. So your mobile home is maybe worth $30,000, but the bid at tax sale was a few hundred or $1,000, and you're out 20 some odd $1,000. So that's the concern. We obviously also see folks going through tax sale just because of, you know, the regular financial hardships that hit people, divorce, losing jobs, medical issues, right? And these are folks who are in financial crisis and are facing not only, you know, the financial crisis, but the potential loss of housing associated with the property tax sale process.
Grace, in the report, there was a little bit about sort of why there's a bit of a danger in putting the minimum too high. And I wondered if you have thoughts on that.
I mean, obviously from the perspective of my clients, I'm in agreement with having a threshold, and I support $1,500 because there's consensus around that. I guess I sort of disagree with the premise that folks aren't paying that can pay. And so to some extent, you know, from my perspective, the larger the number, the better, because we want to keep people housed. And there are other collection tools that towns can use that don't result in the loss of housing. And I mean, I understand the concern on the part of the towns, but I think there are a lot of things that towns can do, for example, to help folks with this property tax credit issue, you know, ensure that abatement is really available for those folks who can't pay. And I will say it's very inconsistent across towns. It's a very discretionary process. Folks don't have a lot of training on the boards of abatement about the process. And we find that in some towns, they're very good about taking into consideration folks' financial circumstances and abating where it's appropriate. And in some towns, they tend to have sort of a policy of not granting abatements based on inability to pay. So that can be very inconsistent. I guess I know that we have limited time, so I'm gonna, and I know that you may have limited appetite for action that you can take this session, given all of the other issues in front of you. But I do just want to echo the $15,000 or the $1,500 threshold for tax sale. I mean, I think that is a really important change that could make a difference, particularly for those really low, really vulnerable fixed income homeowners, so that they don't find themselves in a situation where they lose housing over, you know, truly hundreds of dollars of tax debt. And that will hopefully also incentivize towns, you know, to start working with folks early and often to help folks get connected with the property tax credits they're entitled to avail themselves of the abatement process. Many homeowners aren't aware of that, even though there are notices, right? You're often getting these very wordy notices that are hard to understand. And towns don't always have very good guidelines on the abatement processes for folks to tap into. So I think that is something that is a good starting point that is going to provide real protections for folks. The other thing that I would urge the committee to think about doing is implementing the statewide data collection system, because we don't have comprehensive data about what's happening across the state. We've got 250 some odd towns who are collecting their data and doing their tax sale process in their own way. And there are points throughout the tax sale process where statutorily towns are required to record things in the land records. So just even having a system where towns could register a tax sale and then upload, the notice of sale, which they've got to issue and put in the land records anyway. Any, redemption notice when someone pays and redeems. If they don't, the tax collector's deed, so that we could have good data about how many people are actually losing their properties in the tax sale process. And then hopefully with, better, more comprehensive statewide data, the legislature can make really sound policy decisions about how to deal with things like the loss of equity that homeowners experience at the end of the tax sale process. And I'm happy to talk more about that issue. That is something that Legal Aid is continuing to litigate and represent clients around, because we are seeing people who are losing tens of thousands of dollars and sometimes even hundreds of thousands of dollars through the tax sale process. But it is a big question. And I think part of the problem is that right now.
Josh.
Good. It's not an attempt to sabotage my testimony. Right. So I think that part of our issue in terms of coming up with detailed recommendations is that we don't necessarily all have a shared understanding of the scope of the problem. Again, Vermont Legal Aid did its own research. In 2019, 2020, there were about 150 tax sales each of those years reported to us, but it was only 2/3 of towns that provided that data. And because we don't have sort of a standard system for data collection, we got very different records from each of the town, and it took hundreds of hours of staff time to sort of wade through it and try and figure out what the data was telling us. So I guess I will leave it there unless anyone has questions. All righty.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Seen this issue for way back when. I think pre-pandemic even was the first time I had a conversation with someone about it.
Could be.
Yeah.
I remember back that far.
Thank you. Alan, do you want to join us?
Let's see if I can actually share a screen.
Wait, it takes a minute sometimes.
Oh.
Okay. You have success, but if it could be larger, our eyes could see it.
So this is on the website, and I'm going to run through a bunch of data that if you had a cheat sheet, which I'm happy to provide you. I understand you don't like to be flooded with paper. I have it for anybody that's interested. So my name is Alan Bierke. I don't know very many of you. I testified last year. Just by way of background, I've been an attorney in Vermont for over 30 years. I'm semi-retired now. I served 3 terms in the House back in the 90s. And for over the last decade, I've been a tax sale investor, going to these tax sales, bidding, buying liens, sometimes getting the property. So I've attended over 100 of these tax sales and researched and gotten ready for them. But I wasn't on the study group. You didn't make a place for an investor on the study group. So I did follow them and watch what they were doing. But because there was some issues with public meeting law, I didn't know that all of the meetings were happening.
I'm sorry about that.
Anyway, no worries. So, but what Grace and Chris said, I will echo, which is that there is very bad data in terms of trying to get your hands around what's going on out there. And we raised this last time, and the advocates like Grace say, create this narrative that people are losing their homes for hundreds of dollars of tax debt, and they're just getting wiped out of, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equity. And then you have the practitioners and the investors saying, in our experience, we don't see that. That's not what's actually happening. So to try and get a handle on that, I began collecting data. As Grace mentioned, it is not easy to find this data because it's spread about all of these small towns, and not all of them are on the internet. But I was able to successfully survey about 50% of the towns, and I'm pretty confident that I got all of the towns that had tax sales, because I looked not just to the towns, but to newspapers, to the 7 attorneys that do most of this work in the state, and to a number of other sources.
Thank you for your public service.
Next time you could compensate people. But anyway, there's approximately 340,000 properties in Vermont, including condominiums. And 32 municipalities conducted a tax sale in 2022. Now, why did I take 2022? Before 22, as late as the end of 2021, you had the Vermont Housing Assistance Program, which paid off taxes for primary residents if they were at risk of losing their home. So if you studied prior to 2022, you would get a skewed analysis of what you're actually looking at going forward. I've started the research for 2023, but if it sold in 2023, the deed wouldn't have issued until as late as December of 2024. So that data is still being collected. There were a number of properties that went for tax sale. More than half of them were paid off before the actual sale occurred. Of the 115 properties that were actually sold, only 36 deeds were actually issued to the purchasers. And the excess value was returned to either the delinquent taxpayer or the unclaimed property fund. And though that yielded an additional $372,000 to the taxpayers. These are not, the properties that were lost at tax sale were not owned by were not being resided in by the, okay, none of them. There's 2 that had residents at all. They're both in Newport City. We'll go into those, but one was a property that had been taken over by squatters. And the other was something called an heirs property. An heirs property is when the title to property is in the name of somebody who has long died. But the family owners, members continue to live there without going to probate. And so you see that some in Vermont, you see that a lot in the deep south of the United States. So people just continue to live there and pay the bills. But if you try to find who actually owns that property, you're doing estate planning work going back, several generations. Let's see how I can advance this. So I actually compiled a list of each property that sold and a deed was issued for a tax sale that was originally noticed in 2022. And they're listed here in alphabetical order and then by the property itself. If you look across the top, the address is the address of the property. Where there's no number, that means it's raw land. They only generally put a house number when there's a house. The type of property is whether it's residential, land only. There is a commercial property in here. The delinquent taxpayer resides is whether they live in town, in state, out of state, or deceased, or we had one bank-owned property and one commercial property. So those are just ranked as commercial. What the taxes were due, and then what the sale price was. So in order to get at some of these, one thing that is important to look at is you will see that there are properties that sold for just a couple $100s, most notably in the town of Warren. Warren is a community that has a particularly development, which is not unique to Warren. There's one in Reedsboro. There's one similar to it in Grand Isle. In Warren, it's called Alpine Village. And in the 1950s, a developer purchased 290 acres of property and divided it up into 2,600 10th acre lots. And it was a scam, okay? He offered them for free, but if you bought it, to get the deed issued was $75. And then if you wanted to buy the property next to it, it was $200 per lot. And since it would take 6 or 7 of these properties in order to have sufficient land for a water and a septic system, that was the scam. This is the largest one in Warren, but you'll see the tax bills are a couple $100, but none of these are occupied properties. And if you look through the list, one of them was out of state. One of them was deceased. Everybody else lives out of state. They just have these little piece of land in Vermont. So this page has the detail of all properties that were actually noticed for tax sale. And what you'll see is most of them did not actually go to the tax sale. And you'll see that of the 115 properties that were went to tax sale, municipalities only purchased 14 of them. So my perspective on that is that the interest rate is appropriate. You're getting most of these to actually sell. Municipalities have the option, not the requirement, to purchase if nobody else bids. There are many reasons why a municipality will not bid if it's got liability associated with it, particularly environmental. Or in Plymouth, for example, there's a yeah. And when they were breaking up with their ownership, the HOA fees were like $6,000 a year. So if the town bought the property, they would become liable for that debt. And so they didn't buy stuff if it came up. Anyway, walking through the list, what I've also done is provided an actual detail of each property. So this is Harmon Road in Bennington. This is not a habitable property. You can see what people bought was not something that they could move into. This one on Lion Street in Bennington looks better. This one on Niles Road, completely overgrown. This is what you see when you're going to look at purchasing property at tax sale. Another one in Bennington. This is 940 Main Street. And then this one is land only. This is a strip of land that is between a development and Woodford Road is Route 9. And in between this strip and Woodford Road is Roaring Brook. And this property floods 50% of the time. So that's the kind of situation you get. You also, this is Bethel. This is a landlocked parcel. So there's no access to the road. Landlocked parcels are typically bought by the neighbor because they have some access to it. The second one in Bethel, this is shown as being on a road, but that road has not actually been cut yet. So if you buy that and you want the road access, you would have to do that. And then here is another completely landlocked parcel. This is one in Brattleboro that achieved the highest sale price of $135,000. And the owner was deceased, and it finally came up for tax sale.
It's a really good spot.
Yeah. Ducharme in Cabot, you have two. This is a tiny parcel that was bought by the adjoining landowner. And this second one on Ducharme, if you can see closely enough, where you folks required that somebody post a notice on a structure. This has 2 campers 500 feet from the road. The delinquent tax collectors really don't like that provision. If there's a house.
There was also caveats for if that was not possible.
It's
Yeah.
possible. But if you want to revisit anything, that is something that when you look at these real life examples, we're not happy about. Again, a mobile home on the road. This is my most interesting one. And it's shown here. The building is right here. That's the US-Canada line. This is the US Customs, that's the Canadian Customs. It's between the customs station. If you want to leave your house, you have to go through customs, either direction. It also has a failed septic system. This is one that was purchased by the town, but you'll see they only got half the building because they didn't tax the Canadian section. They don't have the right to the Canadian area. So these are some Newport properties. This is the house that was actually being resided in by the son of the decedent, an heir. And so the tax investor bought this property. It was in terrible condition, replaced the roof, replaced the windows, replaced the door, replaced the furnace, and now rents it to the son. It's a much safer, more habitable property. And then this is the bank-owned property. You can see the realtor sign out front, and they weren't able to sell it commercially and let it go for taxes. This is the only commercial building, was down in Reedsboro. And then we get into the Warren. I'm sorry, this is Rutland. This house also needed all new windows, doors, electrical, plumbing, and a furnace. A couple. I know.
I want to make sure we have enough time for the key takeaways.
I'm finally getting to my last slide.
I appreciate the tour of the state.
This is the Warren. So that you see there's a ton of these tiny little parcels, and then some people have grouped several of them together, and that allows them to actually have a habitable property. So that actual data tells you that the narrative that people are losing their homes because they're not able to pay a couple $100s in tax is simply not the data. That's not what the evidence shows. And that there are a number of parcels that if you set this minimum fee due of $1,500, they're not going to be able to ever collect the taxes on these properties because it would take years for it to get to that point. If you want to hear from the town of Warren or the town of Reedsboro or the town of Grand Isle about how that really matters, I'd strongly recommend you do that before making that change. So that is all that I have for you. But if anybody has any questions about the tax sale process,
If Representative Maslin has something.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe you can't answer this question right now, but I'm curious to know how those teeny weeny little parcels ever got subdivided as legal.
Pre-Act 250.
Pre-Act 250. Okay, that does it. Thank you, sir. And Warren, I understand, was a locus of bad behavior. Maybe that's not right.
Oh, Reedsboro did it too.
Not the right thing.
And in
to say.
Grand Isle, it's called the Florida Development Company. So if you're buying it from the.
Yeah, we're on the same page, sir, and I'll be quiet.
That's fine.
Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you.
Josh.
Brandis can join me.
Samantha, sorry, your name's not there, so I didn't see your name. There's a second chair right there.
Well, so, let's see.
These adorable little curtain things.
The Sergeant at Arms orders which the Appropriations Committee and so we're.
Yes, and you go to slideshow.
Okay.
Thanks. And, we did a lot of, sorry, before you get started, I should have said this while you were interneting or whatever you were doing. When we passed the original bill, we spent a lot of time looking at the data that legal aid had collected. And we don't have time to sort of relitigate the whole original bill this year, but if folks want that sent around, we can certainly send that around. Josh, Samantha.
Well,
Yours.
the record, Josh Hanford from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns.
Is this your first time here? Right now?
Yeah.
Welcome to Ways and Means, both of you. Thank you for joining us.
We hope to be back soon.
I'm sure you will.
First, let me just say by maybe we're the folks that have to bring some hard reality to this discussion, since these property taxes are what affords you the rest of the decisions in this committee and others, and they need to be paid. And that's the system we have. And there are certainly some inequities and some challenges for low-income folks. And we contend there's other ways to deal with that, like having a assistance program to help pay property taxes for folks in need, like we had during COVID. With that said, we wanted to jump right into the working group recommendations and start right with the strong objection that we have about the equity, that the municipality is responsible for the equity in the property. I think you said earlier, Chair, that municipalities are not in the real estate business, nor do we want to be or have the capacity to be, and that there are other remedies to gain that equity, such as selling the home. It's unfortunate that we have these expenses that are a burden to low-income property owners, but they do own property, and this is the system we have. And if we're moving away from that, we have a lot of other work to do. We're seeing increased delinquencies in property taxes in municipalities. We'd be happy to have some come in and talk to you about that and how that affects their municipal budget. But as we stated earlier, the municipality has to pay the property tax bill to the state for the ed fund, regardless if they collect these taxes. And that is a burden that is hard to bear. So we strongly oppose being put in a position of trying to recoup folks' personal equity. Sorry.
And if I could say something additionally about that, I think as you saw in some of the examples that was shared in the testimony before us, it is not safe to assume that the appraisal value is the market value of these properties. Another thing, on the next slide, we will get back to some feedback from our municipal members, sort of above and beyond the Act 106 working group process. But within that is, we're hearing that the new process and the new length of process is bringing some delinquent taxpayers to the table to work with the municipality on other options for repayment of before getting to tax sale. It is now a longer process, and there are new requirements in the law under on the municipality to offer repayment in addition to deferment and abatement. So we'd like to see how that goes. We think it's a little bit premature in the implementation of Act 106 to reopen that.
On the $1,500 threshold, we did support the consensus agreement. Although I will say that will impact some municipalities disproportionately. We were on a phone call with the town of Alburg. They have a number of mobile homes / RV parks where people live in them 6 months, maybe 6 months and a day. 396 lots that they'll never reach this. And if people don't pay their property taxes and they have no recourse, it'll be painful on their budget. And there's other communities that also have a number of mobile home parks, manufactured housing communities with mobile homes and unlanded community that will be hard to reach this threshold, but yet they are a significant part of their housing stock, and their property taxes not paying has an impact. So I would say we support this reluctantly, knowing that most tax sales and the work involved really doesn't happen until you get to a threshold around this. But it's going to be, the impact is going to be borne by some municipalities more than
Are
others.
those situations with mobile home park situations where the park is owned by a cooperative or an owner, or is it situations where the land is owned by the person with the manufactured home.
These are unlanded RVs or mobile homes or tiny homes. And this also happens outside of these parks with tiny homes.
But the land is owned by someone else.
The land is owned by somebody else, yeah. And it becomes real property under law after, I think, 190 days, and the town has to then collect.
And there's been much debate on the very margins about whether or not it makes sense for manufactured homes to be real property or not.
Yeah. Yeah, from our members as well.
Yes, yeah.
That number again in Alberg was, would you say 396?
396.
Wow, okay, thanks.
We believe the current monthly interest
And not, I'm
rate.
sorry, it's not that 396 people are delinquent,
No,
are delinquent, it's just that's how large the park is.
they have a very hard
It's
time
three.
following through. It's 3 parks with 396 total lots. And it's a struggle for them to collect property taxes. Someone can move one day before the date. It's a challenge. They're actually seeking, advice on whether they should ignore the statute that says they're supposed to collect or what they're supposed to do with these situations.
And there's a few towns that have sort of, that real property question becomes a very real question for them.
This comes up with camps too, just land that's used for camps and an RV like moved around. Town may or may not know where it is, if it's still on the property or not. Is it real property?
So how many, sorry, when we're talking about Albert, for instance, with 396, you carefully said 6 months on the day to indicate it's a primary residence, but in how many cases are your towns finding that a tax sale is on a primary residence versus a non-primary residence?
Well, I don't have that data in front of me, but Alan's data, if you comb through it, you can see that, and what we've heard from our delinquent our tax attorney that served for VLCT on this working group, in his part of the state, he sees a lot of tax sales that are out-of-state owners. And in fact, repeated. They'll be back on the list 5 years now. That's the only way they're paying their taxes. They're being compelled to through our tax sale process. Otherwise, they're not paying them. So I think it is all of the above sort of properties and the variety that Alan expressed that we're dealing with here. We believe the current interest rate is doing the job. Don't believe it should be changed. It's lower than the interest rate charged prior to tax sale.
So over the last several months, that the new law has been in full effect, we have heard feedback from a number of our members, especially those who are delinquent property tax collectors, which is we know about half elected, half appointed public servants. And this is some feedback we've received from them, kind of above and beyond the topics mandated in the working group report. So the first one, the complaints about this first one are very compelling. Remember that these are mostly volunteer folks. They are compensated as low as $10 per hour for their service being the collection of both municipal and state property taxes.
Take a commission?
Some of them take a commission, some of them serve more than one town, but about half are elected. And they feel unsafe, and they feel like the practice of posting on someone's front door is also unkind and something they don't want to be required to do to a neighbor. And unsafe in they're often approaching warned private property. But also they may be in an unstable building. And there's like a threat to their physical safety, hopping fences, things like that. The second is, this is a general priority actually for VLCT in this legislative session, which is to hold municipalities harmless for uncollected state property taxes. The municipal share that is ultimately recuperated through a tax sale, or the municipal share all the time is generally 30% or lower or less of the overall property tax bill. And But meanwhile, throughout the abatement or deferral process and throughout the tax sale process, which now could go on for up to 3 years or longer, the municipality is paying the state share of that property tax bill to state government. And ultimately, throughout that period of time, other taxpayers in the community are carrying that burden on their property taxes in the next year's budget. We discussed this, consider complications in implementing this law on unlanded mobile homes, RVs, and tiny homes. And then allow municipalities to recuperate the full costs associated with a tax sale, including the removal of waste hazards, salvage, and scrap. Representative Larry Sakowitz has sponsored Bill H-72, which VLCT supports, which would make this possible so that if throughout the process of bringing a parcel to tax sale, the municipality incurs cleanup costs, that those could be recuperated in the sale.
Where is that bill?
It is, Larry is in, sorry,
I'd have to check.
Sakowitz is in House Environment. I have not seen it taken up yet.
It's, the bill is in House Environment.
I'm not positive, it might be GovOps.
GovOps. Yeah.
Okay.
But, you know, our statement here is if we're going to open up this tax sale, this is also an issue. It's actually brought to us by the town of Brattleboro. They have a number of expenses on properties that they've cleaned up for safety of their neighbors. And they have no way to recoup those costs at this point. Folks ignore paying the fees or fines. But if that property goes to tax sale, they want to be able to add those fees on to be able to collect them because the other taxpayers, again, are covering those costs. And these are often hazardous cleanup, cases of multiple cars or, think of the sort of complicated life we live with dangerous materials on our properties. And that's being borne by the other taxpayers at this point.
And this issue is definitely in play with flood affected
Yes.
properties and fire affected properties.
I think in Brattleboro it was a fire up for tax sale and then there was a fire. Yeah.
So, H-72 would require the purchaser of the property at tax sale to reimburse the town if it went that far, for waste hazard salvage removal. Is that how that would work?
It would allow there are allowable expenses currently that in addition to the property taxes that the municipality can receive funds for after the sale, it would add fees to that list.
So
like
tax,
attorney
water,
fees.
sewer,
Yeah,
for example.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But it could also be a way to compel people to pay or clean up, knowing that if they're also delinquent on their property taxes, this is going to be added. And so,
If they redeem, then they owe that additional cost.
Representative Maslin.
Yeah, thank you. Just on that last point, Josh.
go back.
Well, that's right.
Iris.
Allow the collection of, stuff.
Yeah.
Waste removal, da, da, da. So that's assuming that there's the only source would be from the tax sale. If there's resources there from which to recoup. Okay, I understand your desire. Yes, we'll have to go through, but sure, that makes sense. Someone needs to clean it up, and I'm aware of property in my district that has ended up that way.
Exactly. And perhaps more reason to support the $1,500 threshold because these cleanups are rather expensive.
They can be very, no good salvage yard dealer. I mean, that's basically where it comes down.
Correct. Any more questions on these? This is more of a general list of our sort of priorities. Understanding.
Separate from this issue.
Separate from this issue, separate from this issue. The reality is that 20-30% of property taxes are, go to the municipality. We know there's a discussion in here, thank you, about local option taxes and returning surpluses. We also support the effort to ensure no property owner pays less than 0%. in
We're gonna put
property
that in the
taxes.
miscellaneous tax bill.
Okay,
Okay.
because there are some cases where that's happening, people are getting reimbursed.
And that's an administrative hiccup, not a policy decision.
Yep. We also support grantless growth for infrastructure, supporting new housing. And then more common to maybe other committees, but Florida municipalities relief from complicated deadlines, impact fees when corresponding state funding is delayed, eliminated, or made competitive. A lot of this comes in sort of the environmental world. There's certain conditions and requirements that you're supposed to meet, but then there's no funding or it's competitive and you can't access it. But so we're asking for that to be considered because all of these add to property tax increases and borne by the taxpayer. So didn't want to leave just this one topic without expressing that there's much more to uncover here.
Thank you. And I think we have you all scheduled in 2 more times in the next week or 2. So
Great.
thank you.
If I could add, I lived in Alpine Village for 5 years. That's where I fell in love with Vermont. I lived there 2011 to 2016 when I was fortunate to buy a home. I live in one of these properties, or I rented one of these properties that was able to be built by a lot of hard work by my then landlord and parceling together these. It's a beautiful place to live. A lot of low, moderate income, a lot of service workers live there and are raising their kids there. And I'm for one, happy to see more of them being converted into a place where a family can live.
And that only happens with a tax sale, so someone can acquire it.
Yeah.
Blueberry Lake.
Yep, right behind Blueberry Lake. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Folks, we are done for the day, actually, but fortunately, I do, I have presents for after. Report.
Oh, good enough. It's property tax relief for homeowners.
I knew it.
Property tax circuit breaker. Okay.
Good.